The coffin was already being lowered when her best friend leaned close enough for me to feel her breath tremble against my ear and whispered, "Arjun, she didn't want you to give up, especially not on yourself." The word struck harder than the sound of dirt hitting wood. Harder than the final hymn. Harder than the unbearable silence that followed when everyone else began to walk away. If you believe in kindness and second chances, take a moment right now to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel, Kindness Journal. Stories like this remind us that even in our darkest hours, light can find its way back. It was a bright afternoon, the kind of daylight that feels almost cruel when you are drowning in grief. The sky above Maplewood Cemetery was painfully blue, untouched by the sorrow gathering below it. Sunlight spilled over the headstones, over the fresh mound of earth, over the wilted white lilies arranged around the grave. I remember thinking how wrong it all felt. The world was moving forward in golden, ordinary daylight, and mine had stopped. My wife, Kavya, had been gone for 6 days. 6 days since the accident on Harbor Street. 6 days since a distracted driver had crossed the median. 6 days since the doctor had stepped into the waiting room and said the word, "sorry," in a voice too rehearsed to be human. We had been married for 9 years. 9 years of mismatched coffee mugs, Sunday morning pancakes, and arguments about which movie to watch. 9 years of shared dreams about opening a small bookstore cafe by the river. She would handle the books and I would make the coffee, she used to say. We would call it, second chapter. It was her favorite phrase. She believed life always offered a second chapter, even when the first one hurt. But standing at her grave, I felt like my book had been slammed shut. After the burial, people approached me with gentle eyes and soft condolences. Mrs. Delaney from next door pressed a casserole dish into my hands as if it were an anchor. My cousin Rohan hugged me too tightly. Their kindness blurred together. I nodded, thanked them, barely hearing the words I was saying. Then there was Mira. Mira had known Kavya since they were 7. They had grown up in the same narrow street in Jaipur before life scattered them across cities and continents. Mira stood a little apart from the others, her dark hair tied back, her face pale but steady. She didn't cry loudly like some of the others. Her grief was quiet, contained, like a storm pressing against glass. When the crowd thinned and the priest had left, Mira stepped closer to me. I expected another condolence, another apology for a loss none of us had caused. Instead, she leaned in and whispered the sentence that would unravel everything I thought I knew. She didn't want you to give up, especially not on yourself. There was something in her tone that made my chest tighten. Not pity. Not simple comfort. Urgency. I pulled back and looked at her. Her eyes held mine for a second longer than necessary. Then she slipped something into the pocket of my black coat. "Read it when you're alone," she said softly before walking away toward her car. I didn't check my pocket until that evening. The house felt cavernous without Kavya. The sunlight that streamed through our living room windows during the day now faded into a dull amber, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors. Her shoes were still by the door. Her half-read novel lay open on the armrest of the couch, a bookmark tucked halfway through. I sank into the couch and finally reached into my coat pocket. It was a small envelope, cream-colored, my name written across it in Kavya's familiar looping handwriting. My hands began to shake. Inside was a letter. She had written it 2 months before the accident. She dated it carefully, as if she knew one day I would cling to that date. The letter wasn't morbid. It wasn't written like a goodbye. It was written like a plan. She told me she had seen the way I had been fading over the past year. How I had poured everything into my corporate job, chasing promotions I didn't even want. How I had stopped sketching, stopped playing the old guitar in the corner, stopped talking about second chapter. She said she missed the man who dreamed with her on our tiny apartment balcony, who believed in warm cafes and community poetry nights. She wrote that she had started putting aside a small amount of money every month in a separate account. She called it the second chapter fund. It wasn't much, she admitted, but it was enough to start something small. Enough to take a risk. I don't know what tomorrow holds, she wrote. But if there ever comes a day when I'm not there to nudge you forward, promise me you won't shrink. Promise me you won't let grief or fear convince you that you're meant for a small life. You are not. I read the letter 3 times. By the 3rd time, the words blurred through tears I hadn't let myself shed at the funeral. She had believed in me more fiercely than I had ever believed in myself. The next morning, the house felt different. The grief was still there, heavy and suffocating, but beneath it something else flickered. A memory of her voice. A memory of her laughter when I burned the first batch of espresso beans we tried roasting at home. A memory of her saying, "We'll figure it out, Arjun. We always do." I called Mira. We met at a small park near the river, where the autumn sun filtered through golden leaves. Children were playing on the swings. A man walked his dog along the path. Life continued, indifferent but persistent. Mira listened as I told her about the letter. She nodded slowly. She confessed that Kavya had spoken to her about the fund. That she had worried about me long before the accident. That she had wanted to surprise me on our 10th anniversary with the first deposit on a lease for a tiny storefront she had already scouted. I felt both shattered and awed. Even in her busy life, she had been building something for us. For me. I don't know if I can do it alone, I admitted. The words felt raw. The cafe. The bookstore. It was our dream. Mira looked out at the river, sunlight dancing on its surface. Maybe it still is, she said gently. Dreams don't disappear just because someone does. Sometimes they become the way we keep them alive. The weeks that followed were the hardest of my life. Grief doesn't move in a straight line. It circles back on itself. Some mornings I woke up with determination, ready to visit potential storefronts. By afternoon, I would be sitting in the car outside one of them, unable to get out, convinced I was foolish to think I could build anything without her. There were practical obstacles too. The fund was modest. My savings were limited. Friends questioned whether it was wise to leave a stable job in the middle of heartbreak. My manager tried to persuade me to take extended leave instead of resigning. But every time doubt threatened to swallow me, I reread her letter. You are not meant for a small life. I found a narrow space on Linden Street, bathed in afternoon sunlight. It had brick walls and a large front window that overlooked a row of maple trees. The rent was lower than most because the previous tenant had closed abruptly. When I stepped inside, dust swirling in the light, I could almost see it. Shelves along the walls. A counter near the back. Small wooden tables by the window. I signed the lease with trembling hands. Renovations were exhausting. I painted the walls a soft cream color Kavya had loved. I sanded the old floors myself to save money. Friends volunteered on weekends. Even Mira showed up with paint-splattered jeans and a toolbox, laughing softly as she reminded me how Kavya would have criticized our uneven brushstrokes. There were nights I stayed alone in the empty space after everyone left, sitting on the floor, whispering updates to the silence. I told her about the carpenter who gave us a discount, about the local author who agreed to host a reading once we opened, about the way the place smelled of fresh wood and possibility. On the day we hung the sign, my hands shook again. Second chapter. The letters were simple, painted in deep blue against white wood. I stepped back onto the sidewalk and looked up at it as the midday sun lit it from above. People slowed as they passed. Some smiled curiously. Opening day arrived in full daylight, crisp and bright. I had barely slept. I half expected no one to come. But at 9 in the morning, Mrs. Delaney was there, clutching a bouquet of sunflowers. Then Rohan. Then neighbors. Then strangers drawn by the sign and the scent of fresh coffee drifting into the street. By noon, every table was filled. I moved behind the counter, pulling espresso shots with hands steadier than they had been in months. Laughter echoed against the brick walls. Someone browsed the poetry shelf. A young couple argued playfully over which novel to buy. For the first time since the funeral, the sunlight didn't feel cruel. It felt warm. At one point, I glanced toward the door and saw Mira standing there, tears in her eyes but a proud smile on her face. She didn't need to say anything. I knew what she was thinking. She would have loved this. That evening, after we closed, I sat alone at one of the window tables. The streetlights flickered on outside. My body ached from the long day, but my heart felt strangely light. Grief was still there. It would always be there. But it had changed shape. It was no longer a weight dragging me under. It was a quiet companion, reminding me of what had been and urging me toward what could still be. If this story has touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like, share, and comment. Your engagement helps stories of hope and second chances reach someone who might be standing at their own breaking point. I realized then what Myra's whisper had truly meant. Kavya hadn't just feared that I would give up on the cafe. She had feared I would give up on myself. That I would let tragedy define the rest of my days. But standing in the soft glow of second chapter, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic, I understood something profound. Love does not end at a grave. It changes form. It becomes courage. It becomes memory. It becomes the gentle push that moves us forward when we cannot move ourselves. Before you leave, I have one small request. Comment the words, second chapter, below if you believe that even after loss, life can begin again. Because sometimes, at a funeral under a mercilessly bright sky, when everything feels buried, a single whispered sentence can become the seed of something new. And in the full light of day, against all odds, that seed can grow.